and funding workshop. My name is Rodri. I work for Social Business Wales. I'm joined by my colleague Elizabeth, who is also from Social Business Wales. Um, Social Business Wales is a programme that's funded from Welsh Government. It's delivered by a consortium which is led by us at Compass, but we're joined by our partners DTA Wales, Social Firms Wales, Unlimited, and the WCVA. We're all here to help and guide you through starting up a social enterprise and running that social enterprise and making it the best it could possibly be. So please get in touch, drop us a question if you think we can support you, sign up for our support, and we will guide you through the process of your social business. Nothing more to say really from my point of view, so I will hand you over to Richard Newton, who is our expert speaker today. He's going to talk to you about how we actually find some of those fundings that are out there, what it means for our social businesses, what are the different types of funding that's available, and also that all-important question that everybody asks, well, how do I actually write a successful bid and how do I actually win some of this money? So Richard will be able to talk us through all of that this morning. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Richard.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. Can everyone hear me all right? Perfect. Yeah, I'm Richard. I've been working in the I've been working for the not-for-profit sector in Wales for over 30 years, and a lot of that time around sort of grant writing, bid writing, commissioning. So hopefully we can explore strong, successful grant writing for social enterprises in this session today that's supported as part of Social Business Wales. And please, do ask questions. Really want to make it your session and make it relevant to you and your own individual situations. So we'll do a bit of an overview first, and then we'll move in after the break and then we'll look at where you look for grant funding, and then we'll do a bit of an overview as to some top tips for strong, successful grant writing. I think that title was really important, actually. Roger gave me the title, but we're in a day and age, I don't know what to say, culture, whatever, where grant writing is probably more competitive than it's ever been. But that doesn't mean it's not an effective or a suitable tool for yourselves as social enterprises. But it does mean that you've got to put strong applications in. It does mean you've got to focus your applications into the right places. And actually, you need to be successful because there is that opportunity cost. Times there's opportunity cost in terms of your time and moving forwards, and the emotional cost of putting your efforts into writing grants and then not getting them is very disheartening. So you need to make sure that you're focused and you move forwards. So that's where we're sort of coming from today. So I thought just to put to we're going to look at the funding options of the grant landscape, the components of successful grant applications, budgeting strategies and success, some Q&As at the end. But as Roger's already said, we're going to cover quite a lot, and we're going to be talking, moving through. So please do put questions into the chat, and we can answer them at the time when we're talking about things, because we will be sort of moving on. So that probably makes more sense. So this infographic is a little bit old. It's 2022 from the Association of Charitable Foundations. And I've looked, they've changed their reporting, their evaluation, and there isn't anything else that captures this sort of data. There isn't a universal, modern or up-to-date, 2022 is not that old, that talks about where sort of money comes from in terms of private giving in the UK. But we're talking about private giving at that time was at 19.1 billion. It's probably dropped slightly. We know that individual and major giving, that 11.7 million is dropping to the lowest levels it's ever been. But there's a lot of money that's coming through the foundations. This talks about 2.9 billion in the top 300 foundations in the UK. And interesting, we then go down to legacies, gift aid pays to charities and corporate giving. And obviously legacies and gift aid actually link up with individuals. So that sort of passes that up to 13, 14, 15, 16 million-ish. And it's a myth that social enterprises can't fundraise. And I hear this time and time again from people, and we've worked with people on the social business framework, and people say, oh, we can't fundraise because we're a CIC or a social business and everything else. And that's totally incorrect. In terms of individual giving, an individual can give their money to whoever they want to give it to. And in actual fact, I used to have a position on the board of the fundraising regulator, the UK regulation regulates fundraising, and was responsible for doing some work with the digital platforms, the Just Givings of this world, the crowdfunders. And Just Giving was saying that, and I don't know, this was 5 years ago, I don't know if this has actually come through and manifested itself, but by the mid-2020s, they were expecting the majority of the money that flowed through Just Giving to be flowing to non-charities. So as long as you're open and honest about who you are and what your governance structure is, anybody could fundraise. You can ask the public for money. This isn't about individual giving, but there are certain bits around sort of, you wouldn't be able to claim gift aid or whatever, but you can fundraise, and you can fundraise from those foundations. This is quite a useful graphic to me that talks about governance and grant funding, because this is really what this session is about. So if we look over on the right, we've got things like unregulated groups, community sports associations, the least regulated, and regulation could be by Companies House, it could be by FCA, it could be by the Charities Commission, but those over on the right are the least regulated. You've got these CICs, companies limited by guarantees, companies limited by share capital there in the middle. They're obviously regulated by Companies House, and you've got the community benevolence societies, and you've got charitable organisations, which include CIOs, charitable trusts, and exempt charities. Exempt charities, people often ask, they are organisations like universities and such like. You have other regulation to maybe higher education councils and such like. So they are charitable, but their prime regulator is somebody else. Okay. So what you find is that when it gets to grant funding, grant funders take confidence in the level of regulation that an organisation has. So the more regulated you are, and the regulation that comes from the Charities Commission, i.e. right over on the left of this graphic, is probably the most intense and the highest level of scrutiny and the highest level of obligations. And that gives assurances to funders. But the key things that grant funders want, and grant funders as opposed to commissioners, are they want to know that you're not for profit, and they want to know that you're not for private benefit. So with CICs, as I imagine most of you are looking at the attendance list, you are, you're working to your community benefit statement and such like, and you're working not for profit. And the important thing for many grant funders is the asset lock. So are people familiar with the asset lock? So in effect, you can't, your assets are secured for your community benefits and what you exist to do. So you can't suddenly change your activities. So if a funder gives you, I don't know, £50,000 towards a sports pavilion, you can't suddenly say we're going to change that sports pavilion into being a beauty salon. You are asset locked. And that's the big thing for the funders, is the asset lock. It's really, really important to think where you are. We've had some discussions. I did an interesting piece of work with Sport Wales, where we worked with the national governing bodies of sport about, where should organisations sit on this arrow. And I think, that's everybody's individual choice. And there is a place for everybody. Obviously, as social enterprises, you adopt models that trade and have earned income. And actually the social enterprise sort of model suits you better, the CIC and everything else. I don't really, I hear people sometimes say, oh, we should change to be a charity because we'll get more grant funding opportunities. I would say that that's a very big decision for people to make. There is significant additional reporting. The additional opportunities may be not as great as you think they are. And it probably reflects a move to a different business model where you're not as reliant or focused on trading activity and you're more focused on philanthropy. And I think those are really important considerations. But the grant market, the grant giving marketplace, ecology, whatever we want to call it, has evolved over time. CICs are relatively new in the great scheme of things, 15, 20 years old. I've been working 30 years. I remember them coming in. And actually, what you find with grant giving is that the majority of your grant giving trusts and foundations have got their own, well, they have to have their own, most of them have their own constitutions that determine who they can give to. And there's been a bit of a catch up. When the CIC was a new organization, people were saying, well, our constitution only allows us to give to charities or such like. But actually, more and more, these funders have changed their constitutions, recognizing the value of the CIC. And they should go forward. And we always say to people, before you make any big decisions about governance, map what that really means in terms of opportunities. We did a piece of work, a few years ago now, funded by SBW Network Foundation for a dance company based in Southampton called Zoe Logic Dance, who'd been on quite a journey. They were an individual, sole trader run by this lady called Zoe, who a very passionate, phenomenal dancer, all about getting men dancing, about active lifestyles, mental health, etc., etc. And she had a bit of a tap on the shoulder and was told to, could she formalise her governance because Arts Council wanted to support her, and she became a CIC. And then Esme Fairburn gave her some development funding and said, well, what about becoming a charity? And there's all sorts of considerations there about can your directors earn and director rotation and stuff like that. And she was like, this is my baby. I've spent 20 years of my emotional energy, my time on this. I don't want to give it up or hand over control. And we said, well, let's map out your trusts and foundations and see where they sit. And we came up with I think 25 target trusts and foundations, people like Children in Need, people like Garfield Weston, and said, if you were a charity, where would you go fishing for the money? And of the 25, 19 were available to the CIC. So it wasn't as closed doors as people perhaps thought. And it's also just worth to look at the fundraising mix at this point. So we talk about your earned income. We've already talked about that, your income from your sales and your trading activities. Your government grants and contracts, anything from Welsh government, local government, and a lot of that might be commissioned income. So it's almost trading. It's purchasing outputs from you, either directly from government grant, or you could be further down a supply chain. Perfectly eligible for social enterprises, as are the majority of the lottery funds that come out. And here I'm talking about the national lottery funds. So Sport Wales, Arts Council, National Lottery Community Funds, and National Heritage Fund, rather than people like People's Postcode Lottery. Then trusts and foundations, where we're talking more philanthropic grant funders, individual giving, corporate support, and community fundraising. And I think it's also worth just mentioning emerging trends. We've got an emerging trend for prize fundraising. So that is people participating in lottery. And then trends, but not really new fundraising areas of the mix, but new sort of approaches, how you would deal with digital fundraising, how you deal with the cashless society, and what that means in terms of, collection boxes. People are very, very wary of the sum up machines, on collection boxes. They don't want to go up there with their phone and think that's going to charge me 20 quid. They think, well, if I reach my pocket and I know I've got 2 quid, that's what I'm putting in a collection. And the use of AI, and we'll touch on AI in a bit. So let's look at grants as a whole. And what is that marketplace? It's really difficult to put a handle on what government grants are, the total, but this comes from UK grant making. This is a new portal, so we haven't got any trend data. This is the first year that they've published it. But they're saying that in the UK, the trust and foundation marketplace is worth 8.2 billion, the whole marketplace 23.4 billion, Government grants, so that's government grants as opposed to commissioned income, 6.7 billion. National Lottery distributes 2.4 billion. Charities, 3.6 billion. To explain that, that is charities, certain charities, I don't know, good example, Save the Children have grant giving schemes. A number of charities have grant giving schemes. That's how that sits. So there's a massive amount of money there, massive amount of money for you to position yourself in to reach. And it's really important that you look at how you might be able to do that. I see there's a question there from Basil about lottery funding. Basil, can I just park that? I've got some actual slides on lottery funding, and perhaps we can take it then. So moving forward, trusts and foundations. Let's look at these first of all. They are private, independent, a better word than private. Sorry, I should have corrected that. Independent entities providing funds to support charitable endeavours. Okay. There's about 8,000 trusts and foundations giving about 3 billion annually in the UK, and the average grant size is £10,000. It's not massive. I mean, £10,000 is very nice for people, but people often talk about the holy grail of the multi-year funding. I want to get 100 grand, 33 grand a year, pay for a salary. That is in the minority, and it's worth just being pressed there. Wales has a low level of trusts compared to the rest of the UK, and that's based on the fact that we know that Wales is a nation that is perhaps less financially well off than other parts of the UK. The trusts and foundations, when we look at where the money comes from, it comes from often private wealth. And obviously, there's a link between private wealth and corporate wealth because people make money corporately, and sometimes corporates give money over. So we don't have that sort of great level of wealth. There hasn't been any real big mapping for a number of years, but there was something about 2017, 2018 that divvied the UK up into 12 regions, nations. And the trust opportunities in Wales was number 11 out of the 12. But actually, there's so many, as a Welsh-based organisation, you can still apply to organisations in the southeast, organisations registered in London and everything else. We've already focused on that last point about focused on charitable organisations, but also CICs and at times individuals. Okay. And how does this happen? So trust and foundations are really worthwhile understanding about this. These are independent organisations, and I can't stress this enough. So these trusts might be personal trusts. So something like Garfield Weston we talk about a lot. Actually, maybe not the best example because Garfield Weston is one of the few big boys that won't give to a CIC. So let's change that. Talk about something like Moondance or the Waterloo Foundation, both here in Wales, very relevant. Moondance is the money of Diana and Henry Engelhardt, who were the founders of Admiral, and they gifted a certain amount, a massive amount of money when Admiral floated into a charitable foundation, Wales being a specific area of interest. Corporate trusts, slightly different to the personal trust. The money that comes from, corporate organisations, either by choice of bequeathing some of their profits, or from public pressure or government pressure to do so. So, for instance, the Lloyds Foundation comes, the money is derived from the sale of assets to do with Lloyds and TSB with mergers and demergers. And some trusts fundraise for their own work. So Children in Need is a charitable trust, but it raises the money from the public and then it redistributes. Most exist in perpetuity. They invest long term. They have a working capital and they reinvest that. Others are shorter term and they look to spend out. And it's not a stagnant pool. We see changes. I mentioned Moondance. Obviously, Moondance is derived from the funding that from funds that materialized through the flotation of admiral insurance. So, that is, new. That was what, 15, 20 years ago. We've just seen this year the closure of the Foyle Foundation. The Foyle Foundation is a foundation that distributes money that comes from Foyles, the bookshop, and clearly, trading sales of books are declining. And actually that foundation is closed, and a number of the smaller trusts and foundations, and we'll talk a bit more about how competitive this is, have sort of said, actually, does giving £10,000 away make a difference when we're trying to deal with social justice? And a couple of them, and Kelly Chase and a couple of the other ones, and have been saying, actually, we're going to spend out. We're going to make some big game-changing donations because they can create the change-making that we want to occur. Right, there's a couple of questions I just want to take. I saw one, just let me scroll up. When I've had CRCs, no, we can't make that consideration. The community benefit society will be considered alongside CICs. They do hold a different place in terms of trust fundraising eligibility. They're actually quite difficult to fundraise for. They probably have lesser eligibility, again, in my experience. So when you were doing your prospect listing and your mapping, it would be really, really important on some of these databases that we talk about, like GrantNav, and we'll come on to these, to actually make sure that you state that you're a community benefit society, because it will put that filter in for you. But you can't naturally assume that CICs and community benefit societies will both be considered by the same funders. It's certainly not, grant funding is open to community benefit societies, but it's not a direct overlap. And then the second question, Andrew, for a social enterprise that has both a CIC arm and a commercial limited arm, how do funders typically expect to present the structure? Should the CIC lead the application? The CIC should lead the application. Going back to this graph, the CIC is further to the left than a commercial limited arm. And the commercial limited arm is likely to be for profit, and the commercial limited arm is unlikely to have the asset lock. So both organizations can be referenced in an application, and you can make the case as to the benefit of having both organizations, but the legal body that would stand the best chance of getting the grant, when we're talking about philanthropic grants, can be different with government grants. But when we're talking about that, we are, funders will be more attracted to the CIC because it offers them a greater level of security. Okay, so again, this has come from 360 Giving this morning. It gives you an idea of how this is made up in terms of the grant making environment. So government got a huge length of central government, arm's length bodies, devolved, and local government. And this is the figures that we saw before. Charities and NHS hospital foundations come in there. Lottery distributors are lottery distributors. The others are donor advised funds. And these are funds that are often handled by organizations like community foundations, where a donor chooses to put their money into a fund, and then the donor advises the fund as to how they want to give it out. And this is independence is really important. This is individuals' money. And if we look in here, corporate foundations, family foundations, member trade funding, these are individuals' monies. And I had a conversation the other day with the Trust Foundation. We talked about entitled fundraisers. I see it quite a bit, and fundraisers going, oh, they haven't given me the money. I thought my project was really good, or I found the application process really onerous. Yeah, you might do, but this is these guys' prerogative. It's their money. If you speak to somebody, and I'm going to use the Garfield Western Foundation, massive foundation, funded by the Western family, still very much run by Lord and Lady Weston. If you get money from it, letters signed by Lady Weston. And actually, they view it as their money. It's their grant giving. They choose to do it. They choose to put this out. Artistically, I was at a presentation this week or last week, by the Colwinston Foundation, which is a Welsh-based arts support organisation that funds the money comes from the royalties from the Mousetrap, Agatha Christie's play in London. But they're actually bequeathed to the chair of the foundation, who's chosen to give them away. And actually, very much he gives to what he wants to give to. It's his money. You have to remember that. And the independence and moving forward, that is really, really, really important. Okay. So they're not the same as the National Lottery, and that independence comes in really, really importantly here. Okay? The National Lottery is underpinned by the National Lottery Act 2006. So there is legislation behind the lottery. Okay, now trusts and foundations have to obviously operate legally, effectively, and everything else, but they're not restricted by specific legislation. The National Lottery Act maps the link between the lottery funders and government. The lottery funders are not allowed to fund anything that is a statutory duty, but they work very closely with government to work towards societal government objectives. So at the moment, we see a big push from the National Lottery Community Fund around sort of addressing mental health, and particularly young people's mental health, because that's thought to be a societal priority. The Heritage Lottery Fund has really sort of been on a journey and is, really looking about making heritage more accessible and bringing underrepresented groups and such like into heritage and everything else. So that's really, really, really important. Okay. There's a difference obviously between the lottery operator, the people who manage the kiosks and the shops, the lottery playing website is different to the distributors. We've got 4 distributors across arts, sports, community, and heritage. And we have a devolved presence on all of those, sometimes much greater than others. So Sport Wales and Arts Council Wales are independent organisations. National Lottery Community Fund and the Heritage Lottery are UK-wide organisations that have Wales committees and Wales programmes. And they distribute small to large funds. And this is really, 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 really important to get your head around, because the smaller funds are very accessible, turn around very quickly, and offer you the opportunity to pilot and develop work on quite a light touch application. And actually, we're imagining that most of you are relatively small organisations particularly when we compare you with the big boy charities of this world, the NSPCCs, the Save the Children, and that sort of stuff that turn over hundreds of millions of pounds, and they prefer smaller organisations. But a big part about the lottery is recognising where the money comes from. So the lottery funders are very driven by the fact that lottery money comes from people who play the lottery, people who live in communities across Wales, across the UK, and they want to make sure that they give back to all of those communities, and they give back to those things, and they want to make sure that your projects that you propose to them and the projects that they fund are wanted by those communities. And so they have a big push on a concept called people in the lead. So they would ask you when you apply to the lottery, who have you spoken to? Why do people want this? What are they telling you? How are you not overlapping with other provision? The idea of people in the lead. And why I bring this in now is the small to large funds. You might want to think about your own lottery journey, so to speak. And actually what you could do is you could secure a £20,000 grant from the lottery now to engage people to find out their views, to pilot work that then informs a larger project. Grant funding is all about relationships, and at the end of the day, saying to the lottery, hey, didn't we do really well with that? Didn't we do really well with that work that we do? wouldn't we like to do more? It would be great. Okay, let's move to questions. So I'm going to just pick these. Seems to be about lottery. So the first one from Basil, I said we'd hold. If you go for Arts Council funding, are we also able to apply for lottery community funding, as they're both lottery based? Yes, you can hold. You can hold funds from all of the lottery funders at any time. You can hold funds. You can actually hold more than one grant from any one of the lottery distributors. There is some sensitivities about matching lottery with lottery, and there are ways to go around that. So what I'm talking about, if you take Arts Council Wales and they fund 80 or 90%, I think, isn't it, at the present time, there are some sensitivities about how you fund the other 20%, and they wouldn't want to see that necessarily coming from another lottery funder. But you could always split your project. So give you an idea, I'm working with an arts company at the moment that's developing an opera about a heritage railway and the engineering behind it, and the difference it made to industry and such like. So we've gone to the Heritage Lottery Fund for the heritage research, the actual really finding out and bringing the heritage integrity in and mapping this out. And then we're going to Arts Council for the the actual artistic elements of it. Equally, you could, if you've got two totally different projects, you could have two totally different projects in your organization. You could be having for your youth organization, you could be having a beatbox emceeing artistic engagement project, and you could also be having a football project funded by Sport Wales. And there's some really interesting overlap you can have here. The biggest lottery funder is the National Lottery Community Fund, and actually, you can position a project that, I don't know, youth drama, young people telling their stories through drama workshops, developing confidence, team working, all of that sort of stuff. Is that an artistic project or is it a social project? And you can package it up as both. You just have to be careful of your sort of language and your narrative. You don't want to make it sound too artistic if you're going to the National Lottery Community Fund. An example work I did with the Sherman Theatre a few years ago. There's a Pakistani from recall, Pakistani or Bangladeshi, Pakistani, I'm sure, community based in around Cathays in Cardiff, where the Sherman is. And actually, when you map it out, these residents all come from the same area of Pakistan, and it all could be traced back to a small group of elders who came to the UK, I think in the 60s or 70s. And they've sort of set up a community here in Cardiff which has these links, and we created a project, a heritage funded by the Heritage Lottery Program, whereby we told the story of these people, and actually we engaged them in the story. We collected their story and they performed the story. So it created a piece of theatre, but actually we were talking about community understanding, community cohesion, recording this important story as to why this Pakistani community are in this part of Cardiff. But we were very careful when we wrote the bid that we then didn't talk about artistic directors or producers. We talked about project managers. And we'll talk in a minute about how oversubscribed everybody is. So you don't want to give people excuses not to fund you. So we don't want to allow the Heritage Lottery Fund the opportunity to think, this is not a heritage project, this is an arts project. Okay, there's a question for Andrew here. If projects combine community benefit, environmental impact, and job creation, is it better to apply under a single umbrella? Proposal or split into multiple smaller bids? It's maybe not that simple. Going back to what we were talking about, I mean, if you're talking about the lottery, you've got, a big pot of money to be going for. If you're looking at some of those other trusts and foundations where the average grant is just like 10,000 quid, you might have to be going for several smaller bids. You don't want to be creating a patchwork quilt lots and lots of different bids that you're trying to balance, plates you're trying to spin, you're better to try and put it all under a primary sort of bid. And you might go to a funder where the primary benefit is about community benefits. Yeah. But most funders these days, for instance, are very environmentally aware and responsible. So actually, whilst they may be about community cohesion, or they might be about addressing antisocial behavior or anything like that, about community benefits, the fact that they're funding a project that is environmentally responsible is important, and will add value. Okay, Kerry said, we have a grant at present. Question I want to ask is how you go about going for more next time. So it's about successful relationships. It's about building and maintaining relationships with people. So there's two sides, really. You've got to, or two aspects, not two sides. You've got to make the case for more money. And I guess there's the internal case for more money, and there's the external case for more money. Yeah. The internal case for more money is that you're the right organization to do this, that you handled the last money responsibly, properly, that you fulfilled your reporting requirements, that you responded in a way, you undertook activities that were legal, that you spent the money on what you said you were going to spend it on, or if you didn't, that you kept your funder informed on that. Lots of stuff's happened. If we take about, lottery funding can be over 5 years, National Lottery Community Fund, and it can take a year in negotiation. So you can be writing a bid where the last year of that bid is 6 years away. So we put that into this context now, with 2025 still just. So a 5-year project could have been written in 2019. Yeah. Well, what's happened since 2019? We've had a global pandemic, we've had a cost of living crisis, we've had war in Europe. Yeah. And none of that was really foreseen. So funders are very, very sensible and responsive to the fact that you're not psychics. Yeah. What you have to do is about responsible fundraising. So actually, you say, well, this isn't going to work now. We made some assumptions that were quite legitimate when we made our bid, but really the world's moved on. You speak about the funder to it, keep them involved. They don't like surprises at the end. And these organizations exist to give money out. Okay. And that's quite an important thing to recognize. Remember, they exist to give money out. It's actually quite a hassle for them to reclaim and have money back. They have targets to give the money out, and it's like taking a dent off their target if you give money back. So it's about keeping people involved. But you've got to make the case then externally why you want more money, if that makes sense. Why there's a need for more money. So they would be asking you in any bid what you've learned from your last work, what you're going to change, what you're going to improve, what you're going to do differently, and what the evidence for that is. Have you got a waiting list? Have you been turning people away? What have people said to you about how they want to do things? So all of that is really, really important. And they're not looking to fund growth for growth's sake. Yeah. They're looking to address the social problems they seek to fund. They're looking to respond to those. We had I run a consultancy, and said at the beginning, we've been going for 12 years, and we work with an array of clients. And we parted company with one client because absolutely brilliant organization, a refugee asylum seeker organization. But for them, a real metric for them was about financial growth. And you're fishing in a finite pool. You can't grow year on year and year. It's going to go bang at some point. But actually, this guy who ran them was absolutely no. Next year we want to raise 20% more money. Yeah, but why? What is the demand for that? There isn't. Your population, your constituent population hasn't grown by 20%. Why do you want to do that? So here we go. We were successful in getting a National Lottery Award for all grant. Can we apply for this one again? Yes, you can. Absolutely, you can apply again. There's some time limits, and I'm afraid I couldn't tell you what they are on top of my head because they've recently changed. So awards for all is now up to 20 grand. And I think you can have 20 grand a year, but don't take that as gospel from me. It might be that you can have 20 grand every 2 years. But yeah, and you can apply for the same. Again, I mean, you have to make the case for your funding. So awards for all, you can also apply just for your core running costs. So obviously you could apply for that again. Or if your case for funding is, I don't know, I'm really jumping around in my mind, but you're running basketball for disadvantaged kids on a housing estate or whatever, and actually, they're great and they're oversubscribed, and you've got all this data that says it's making a difference to the lives of these young people, and actually you've got no other money to run it, and it's gonna stop. Then absolutely, you've got the case to do that. And Kerry said, can we potentially start that next application before the end of the first year reporting? Yeah, you can have more than one application at any one time. So that's something to look at. The lottery's attitude to that is they want to know why you should have more than one application, and can you manage that as an organisation rather than saying you can't. And some of the large organisations, I worked at the Prince's Trust, now the King's Trust, we would be managing 12 or 15 across the UK lottery applications at any one time. And you can have more than one live one, but, there is something about learning from your project and moving forward. So that's important. The other thing I should say is that we talk about you can reply for the same again in the lottery. You can, but there's a point at which you just have to be polite and read the room. And, I've got a couple of clients who've had very large multi-year grants from the lottery. I'm talking £500,000 type grants over 3 years, and they may have had them on 3 occasions. So they've had 9 years of funding. And the lottery can't say to you, don't apply because of that National Lottery Act. Okay, they can't say that. If your project and your organisation is eligible, they have to accept an application. But I've seen more and more of them sort of saying, we've got to be fair. We're hugely oversubscribed. So you should recognise the fact that you've had a lot of funding for us for a number of years, and you can't become dependent upon us. So bear that in mind. And Terry's final comment there about just funding going in your favour if you've been funded before, to a certain extent, yes. There is, they mark your applications to a scorecard, for want of a better word. And actually, there will be some points that sort of say, do we know this organisation? Have they had a grant before? Did they behave properly? Did they do their reporting? Now, obviously, there's certain points that hang there. And actually, if you've never had a grant before, you're not going to score highly on that section. Obviously, if you have had a grant before and didn't behave properly in their eyes, you're going to score negatively on that section. But actually, being known to the lottery is really, really, really important. So this just shows you that I thought this was quite interesting. This just came out of UK grant making. So again, we haven't got any trends. But you look at 27%, if you look in the purple all distributors, 27% of lottery money is going to other non-profits. So that's where I would say your CICs are sitting, and your benevolent societies, their lottery will fund benevolent society, relating back to that previous question. Interesting that the big other non-profit is in sport, and that's because there's an awful lot of CICs, in particular in sport, we find. And then government grants, just quickly touching on that. They come from the UK, Welsh Government, local authorities, research institutions. They have a huge amount of transparency, due diligence. They have to go through its public money, linked to government policy. And, it is getting ever harder because of funding constraints and everything else, and the loss of the structural funds. The money there is getting less and less. And grants versus commission services. So local authorities, in particular health boards, you see opportunities on things like Sale to Wales, Bravo Solutions, which is very much around sort of, we want to commission an organisation to deliver this. I mean, you see all sorts of stuff. Can be sort of arts and health workshops, can be sort of advocacy services, could be management of direct payments, can be running of leisure centres. You see all sorts of stuff. But it's a commissioned service. And that means that the commissioning body has said, actually, we want to outsource this. We can't deliver it internally. And you do see things, particularly like with youth services and everything else, you see a bit of a pendulum, and they go through from a real trend to outsource stuff to a trend to deliver stuff in-house. It tends to be driven to a certain extent about job preservation. So if local authorities are facing cuts, as they are now, they tend to bring stuff in-house. A grant is not the same as that. It's not a purchase. A grant is not subject to procurement legislation, so they don't have to give grants to the best value. And a grant is not payable if you don't achieve. A commission service, i.e. something that's commissioned through tender or competitive process, they're buying outputs from you. And if you don't deliver, it is repayable. Okay. So these grant schemes exist to give out money, okay? And they have different drivers. I think you need to get to understand your potential funder. Some are place focused, some are cause focused. We want to support organisations in Wales, we want to support organisations in Ceredigion, we want to support organisations in North Wales. I didn't touch on that actually when we said there's a greater level of grant funders in North Wales, and that's because of things like the wind farms and energy and the nuclear power plants. They all give grants away in their area as a sort of almost a blight tax, to be honest. We need to give some money away because we are a bit controversial in the community. Some are strategic and some are operational. Something like Children in Need, really, really operational. They want to know that you're going to deliver X number of sessions, X number of workshops, for drama workshops for kids with Tourette's or Asperger's or whatever. They want to know that. They want to know there's going to be 30 sessions, that there's going to be 10 kids at every session. If someone goes as far as want to know the sessions are going to be at like 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night, yeah? And some are strategic. So, people like Esme Fairburn are actually about really shaking up the system, about changing how people think, about changing the structures and changing provision. So, where do you sit when you map your grants out? Where do you want to go? Are you going to a risk-taking funder, one that funds mainstream work? And some have closed application processes. Many of these are the donor-advised funds that we talked about or touched on slightly earlier. I've got a friend who is a donor-advised fund specialist, and she works with people like Robbie Williams and the Beckhams, who don't necessarily want people to know that it's their money. So she is the third party that manages a trust fund that's set up, that goes out and finds the projects that meet with their values and funds them. Okay. Many are small, very few are multi-year funders, and the restricted versus unrestricted. More and more funders are being more prepared to fund core or unrestricted money, but many funders want to fund actual projects. And that's always a challenge for an organisation, because you're always trying to continue to come up with projects, to think of a way forwards. And actually what you want to do is you want to fund your core, you want to fund your hub, you want to fund your overheads, your management, you want to move that forwards. But this oversubscription is really, really important. So when we talked about strong and successful applications at the beginning, okay, the Association of Charitable Funders, in a very recently published report, Foundations in Focus, say that many of their members, so they're members of the foundations that give out money, saw their application volume rise by around 50 to 60%. And more recently, some people are talking about increases of 400% in the number of applications that they're receiving. Number of reasons for this. Times are tough. We know that. Money coming in from government contracts are going down. Money from the public is decreasing. And quite often, demand on services for organisations delivering good causes is increasing, and the costs of increased delivering those services, energy, salaries, and everything else is also increasing. There is also the fact, when I speak to funders, I speak to, I'm lucky, I speak to, people who manage some of these funds, the AI is churning out application after application after application. And they're not particularly good applications. We'll talk about AI in it shortly, but it doesn't help this volumes, and your funders still have to receive the applications, log the applications, respond to the applications. It's a challenge. So that's, really, really some important bits to bear in mind in terms of that you need to do your research. Are you eligible to apply? Do you share those funders' values? Do you meet their criteria? And will it support your vision mission? Both the funding and the activity that you are proposing. Funders will say, why is this organisation going to do this? Why is it going to do that? Why is it wants to do this? How does it fit with what they've done previously? So that journey that we talked about actually in some of the lottery funders about, using your intelligence from the previous bid to move forwards is really important. I have some clients I had a client, it was a few years ago, and again, they were an organisation, a community organisation that represented the sub-Saharan African population. And there was an opportunity that came out to manage the police museum, mobile police museum. I never knew they had such a thing. But I was having to say to this client, why do you want to do this? They're going to say, why you? And I appreciate, thought it'd be fine. I thought it'd be quite good money, but this oversubscription is really, really absolutely there. Funders are not looking for applications to fund. They are looking for reasons not to fund applications. They've got more than enough good applications. You have to make sure your application is bolt and braces and that you've got every base covered. And actually, gone are the days, and this has changed in my lifetime. I've been doing this for 30 years. When I used to be at Marie Curie years and years ago, and people was, we'll take a punt on that. There is no point in taking a punt on stuff. Pro bono economics in 2022, and I would reckon this is worse now. I reckon that 1/3 to 1/5 of grant applications were ineligible and therefore deemed to fail at the start, representing a large amount of wasted time and effort. And the same report estimates that charities, and it was only charities that were cited here, spend 900 million per annum in time and external fees in making grant applications. So, that's a massive amount of money. There is an opportunity cost to every grant application you do. You could be not, you're very small organizations, most of you, and you spend, I like to think relatively skilled at writing applications, but a guy for the Western application, the client will take me 2.5 days. And the client said to me, I could never have done it in that time. So, if you say client's going to take 4 days, well, what else could you be spending that 4 days on? Weigh up the cost against the risk, not just the financial cost, but the social emotional cost. People I see sometimes get really, really sort of, what I'm looking for, but really sort of bought into we're going to get this money and it's going to transform us. such a risk involved in it. It's, you can talk to a funder, you think you're getting all the right signals, and you still don't get the money sometimes. I don't want to sound like I'm doom and gloom, but it's about getting that eligibility and getting that focus right in there. And it's about fundraising and not fund chasing. Know what your projects are. Yeah. Know what you want the money for, have the compelling case for support, and then fundraise for it. Don't see a fundraising opportunity and think, oh, we can make a project up to meet that, because that will come out and be exposed in the application process. So where do you find these funders? Look at your competitors, comparators, your market analysis. Now, I appreciate CICs don't have quite the transparent reporting of charity commission charities, but charities working in the same environments, you have to publish their quite open accounts, quite transparent accounts at Charity Commission, and you can download those. You can see where they're getting their money from, see what's on people's websites. Look at specialist sites. We'll come on to some of those: 360 Giving, Charity Excellent, Funding World. This whole thing about transparency has come through and move forward. Look at subscription sites available, lottery databases, UK government grant databases, membership organisations that might support you, and peer support. And then I'll go through a couple of. So this is 360 Given. This was a search I did this morning. So I just asked them what grants they had on their system that had been given in Cardiff. And they told me 7,100, totaling, what was that? Just over £1 billion from 137 different funders to 2,000 plus organisations between 1996 and 2025. Okay. So we can see that really noticeable in that graph, the peak in 2021, showing how funders responded to the to the pandemic. And then you can go and dig a bit more. Now, I'm not going through everything, but this was the top two, the last, just a screen grab. So both of these are actually from the National Heritage Lottery Fund, which is probably just to do with the fact of when they were uploaded. But you're seeing real detail here about projects. And the really useful thing is, if you know somebody's got a project, it's funded, you can start to drill down and see what they got from it. So we know that here that this Caring for God's Acre, which went, to Caring for God's Acre as the organisation it went to. This Hafanel Hevvik got £325,000. We know that Arts and Business got £235,000 for this project. You start to see, you start to really get some intelligence. Really, really important. Facebook, the fundraising community is really giving and really sharing. Yeah, we all compete for some money, and I talk about this competitive stuff, but there's some really good resources on Facebook. There's something called Fundraising Chat, which has got 20,000 members. There's Trust Hub. People put posts in, and people are really giving, coming back. Okay, I put something yesterday on something. There's a UK government fund that closes this week, England only, about community assets, and it's quite difficult to get on the application form because it's one government gateway. So when you're like myself as a consultant working for a third party, you're sort of like, well, people don't want to give you their logins because obviously all their tax details and everything else are there, and salary details. And we were trying to get the questions, and we had the questions, but we were trying to get the word limits. I put something on Facebook yesterday. I said, can someone help me? What's the word limits on these questions? The answer within 20 minutes. People say, I'm really stuck on this question. Can people give me ideas? Or people say, I want to raise money for this. I'm a CIC. Has anyone got any suggestions? It's a real rich source of information. And then finally, I wanted to, and then we'll stop for a a break. Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who manage the lottery across the whole of the UK, also allow you to really scrutinise projects. So here we have a screen grab as of this morning. I mean, here you're seeing that they've got 76,000. My search was Wales, by the way, so it gives you an idea. 76,000 grants in Wales. This will be since the lottery was formed, which was about 30 years ago now, isn't it? At 2.5 billion pounds. Is that 2.5? I think so. Yeah, 2.5 billion pounds. And again, you're seeing, you know, Kimmel Bay Football Club got 11.5 grand for pitch improvements. The Hayter Hall Community Trust got £5,000 to improve community facilities. We're seeing that Caring for God's Acre again, because obviously it's one of the more current ones, or more recent ones. Learning Disabilities Wales getting 18,000 for gig buddies. You're seeing what's there now. One of the other things that's really important here is you can search by local authority or by parliamentary constituency. And when you're developing a lottery application, there is certain things to think about in terms of where you're going to be delivering this work. Going back to what I was saying about the lottery wanting to make sure that there's a fair share really across all lottery providers. You can actually put out and you can see how much money has been spent in a constituency. Lottery in Wales is very aware that it spends more money in South Wales than North Wales. And that sort of thing can be worked out, and you can bear in mind, particularly if you've got a larger project. Because let's look at something here. I don't think that's going to, not necessarily, yeah. So that Caring for God's Acre project is actually, if we go back here, is I think a Wales-wide project. Transform West Burial Grounds, yeah, it's across all Church and Wales dioceses, but because of the applying address, it's coming in as Butetown Cardiff, which is like a lottery hotspot. So actually, sometimes you could be clever about where you apply from and apply into some of the cold spots. Okay, so let's take a comfort break now quickly. I said 10 minutes, but maybe 5, maybe back up. 10 past, does that suit everybody? Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, 5 minutes and we can all be back here. Excellent. Thank you all.